Thank you, Michael. President and Mrs. Higgins, thank you for coming. Look what you've started. It's extraordinary, really, just to look around at the amount of people here who are as deeply committed to heritage as they are, and we're delighted to see you all here, and particularly delighted that the President is here to celebrate with us our 20th anniversary of the Heritage Act. The opportunity may not come a little bit later on, so I'm going to take it now to thank the staff under Michael's guidance for all the work that they've put in creating today, and for all of our partners and friends who have set up stalls around the building and the grounds to show what it is that they have been doing quietly but hugely successfully on behalf of heritage. We're here to mark 20 years of the Heritage Act, and as I said a moment ago, testimony to what has been achieved during that period is all around us, and it speaks very eloquently for itself. So what I'm going to do is to focus really on a dimension of heritage that I believe will shape a very large measure of the work and the focus of the Heritage Council over the next 20 years, namely the role that heritage plays in creating and repairing community cohesion, collective well-being and belongingness. Communities the length and breadth of Ireland are turning to heritage to begin the process of self-healing, of bonding and a regeneration after more than a decade of financial and social flux, particularly in rural Ireland, where heritage always ranks high on the list of assets and strengths. While job creation may be their long-term goal, communities are doing this because they also know that for a community to move together, it has first to come together. And that process begins with identifying common ground. And typically, this turns out to be heritage-related. A monument, a holy well, a famous person, a precious habitat, a half-forgotten fair or festival, all of them are doors onto past lives. Remembrance of things past, the history of our communities, awakens in us a sense of community. Key from the Heritage Council's perspective is an observable shift in public understanding of what heritage is and means, and how it contributes to both the microstructure and the macrostructure of society. It is becoming an active force in community life, as the discovery and celebration and stewardship of heritage is transferring before our very eyes into public ownership. The sense of public ownership of heritage has never been greater and is increasing all the time, and it's a phenomenon that is unfolding all over Europe. With it comes an appetite, a willingness, and indeed an expectation to embrace fully the principle of shared stewardship. For people and communities interested in knowing more about their heritage, in making more of it, and being more involved in its care, their first and often only port of call is the Heritage Council, either directly or through our fantastic network of heritage officers, whom you met earlier on, President. Unless we can support them, these ideas, these dreams of a better tomorrow, they're built on the tangible achievements of yesteryear, will simply wither on the vine. So this is not just about heritage. It's not just about saving another little bit of the heritage. It's about something far more important than that. It's about caring for society. In your address to the Michael Littleton Memorial Lecture 2 years ago, President Higgins, you said that, and I'm quoting, knowledge of history is intrinsic to citizenship. At the time, you were probably referring to history at a more global level, but as you know very well, the principle applies at a local level too. Conscious and deliberate remembrance is a cornerstone of social belonging and placemaking, the authenticity of which is underpinned by truth. The bill that you brought in 20 years ago poses a question that remains every bit as valid today as it was in 1995. What structures and resources need to be in place for heritage in Ireland to thrive and to deliver the public good that it can now and into the future? For us in the Heritage Council, that starts with people. The community network we have built up over the last 20 years or so, and for which a huge debt of gratitude is owing to the heritage officers, is firmly part of the new infrastructure associated with heritage in Ireland. It underpins our work. The Heritage Council is also focused on developing an infrastructure of specialised bodies of expertise to support critical thinking and policy development around heritage. This, to my mind, is the most important target for the future. Some of that infrastructure is already in place, but pilot projects that have proven their worth and which should be rolled out nationally have been held in suspended animation by the last 7 years of austerity. The gap between public appetite and expectation and state support is widening, which means ultimately that the potential of heritage to contribute to public good, and that means jobs as well, is not being fully realised, not by a long shot. The challenge of public participation is not one of project initiation, it's one of catching up. The public are already leading the way. Facilitating public participation in heritage and heritage stewardship is good social policy. Getting there is not just about resources, it's about attitudes. I recognise that some may fear the prospect of shared stewardship as an unwelcome intrusion of unqualified enthusiasts into the serious business of professional heritage management. But I feel that we should look upon this as a massive opportunity for the heritage sector. There is a middle ground, and there are case studies that prove it. It's not something that can be ignored, because without the public, there simply is no phenomenon of heritage. There's no heritage at all. By that, I mean, in particular, an engaged participative public, not one moving passively or disembodied through galleries, ruins, and scenery, or a public inadvertently removed or separated, disenfranchised by the very efforts that are made on their behalf to preserve and present their heritage. Managing heritage requires not only technical skill and knowledge of theories and philosophies of heritage, but knowing also that there is a psychology to heritage as well. It means understanding, respecting, and honouring the deep psychological connection that exists between people and heritage, and knowing also that it often finds its most powerful, eloquent, and appropriate expression in the language of poetry and spirituality. We're not alone in thinking this way or in setting this challenge for ourselves. It's one of the top priorities of the Council of Europe's Steering Committee for Culture, Heritage and Landscape, which sees heritage, as I've described it a moment ago, as essential to community coherence and an essential component of inter-community and intercultural dialogue. Ratifying and embracing the Faro Convention on the value of cultural heritage for society would be a good first step. It would send out a clear message of intent and understanding and align government thinking with public thinking on matters to do with heritage. And it would mandate the public to shoulder more of the burden of heritage stewardship. Another huge challenge is presented by urbanisation and its corollaries, namely depopulation of rural areas, changes in agriculture, and so-called green energy production. Rural Ireland, like the rest of rural Europe, is at a crossroads, and situating heritage in that space is going to be very tricky. Rural Ireland is not a museum piece, and neither is it a playground. While heritage is a key resource of rural Ireland, we have to make sure that it's not reduced to an atemporal cliché or an anchor around the legs of rural Ireland. The Heritage Council and the Heritage Officers have a good track record of navigating this space, of supporting and setting in motion projects that work and are sustainable. But to be blunt about it, there are not enough people to go around. We need to employ more people in the business of minding and imparting our heritage, and empower more of our own researchers and thinkers to contribute to the national and international discourses around heritage. We are up to these challenges, all of us here, but we cannot, and in fact will not, attempt to do this alone. On a day when all of the omens are good and all of the key indicators are pointing in the right direction, when heritage and the people and communities who make it, who care for it, who promote it, and who believe in it are here with us, the future looks bright. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure and an honour to introduce our President, Michael D. Higgins, who founded and set this whole ball in motion 20 years ago. Pleasure.